Hey, Game Infinite. We are here with 8 Circuit Studios, and we have Noel and James from them. They are working on Project Genesis. I'm really excited to bring this brand new interview format to our YouTube channel in addition to the trailers. And these guys get to be the first. So stay tuned for more on that. I would love to hear a little bit from Noel and James. Tell us a little bit about your guys' studio and the game you're working on, and what do you guys do for each for the business?
Sure thing. Want me to jump in first, Noel?
Yeah, go for it.
Pass the baton. Cool. So I'm James Mayo. I've been in the games industry for, almost 30 years now. Started at Nintendo in the 90s. And so got to participate in the testing of titles like Killer Instinct, Donkey Kong Country. There's a real old school stuff. And then worked my way into Microsoft, worked on like Age of Empires 2, and sort of got a chance to see what it was like from the AAA side of game development. Worked there for about 8 years, was heavily involved with the MechWarrior series. So this is a internal studio called FASA, so I stuck with them for quite a while. Got out of the publisher side and went over to Chicago, where there's a company called Day One Studios. They ultimately got acquired by wargaming.net, and started really focusing on the sort of big question of how does one actually develop a video game from concept to shelf? And that's the position would be called something like a producer or project manager. And so the person who's in charge of schedules, budgets, and resources and talent, that's what the producer does, trying to figure out what the choreography needs to be over time. And it's been really interesting. My background's primarily sort of heavy in AAA and then heavy in indie, and loved indie so much that in 2017 decided to start my own company, and that company's 8 Circuit Studios, and started it with a couple of buddies who I'd worked on previous projects with. And let's see, so I think that brings us to today, which project we're currently working on is Project Genesis. And let's see, I'll leave it there.
Got demonetized on YouTube for mentioning Genshin. I'm They're like, wait, he said Genshin. All right, hold
no, not Genshin. Genesis. I think I'm overclocked because I had a bunch of coffee before I got on. So I'll hand it over to Noel.
Yeah, thanks, James. My name's Noel, and I'm my official position here is marketing coordinator, but I'd like to call myself the button pusher in a lot of aspects. But I have my hands in a lot of the stuff on the community side, as well as the marketing and kind of the exposure side. I've been an avid gamer, specifically kind of in the shooter space since, my first computer was a Tandy, so dating myself a little bit, but I've been into gaming my whole life, and really enjoy not only doing the official kind of aspects of my work here, but also getting to kind of get my fingers into things using some of the experience I have as a competitive player in the shooter scene, with play balancing, weapon balancing, and also getting to have a lot of really cool conversations with people in the community, and utilize the feedback and their experience as well, and kind of be a liaison between our awesome community members and their vast gaming experience, and be able to leverage that into input we can use for the game. So
that's awesome. It's really great to have both of you guys and have you take this time to interview with us. For those that are a little new to our platform, just real quick about us is we're a small gaming news outlet. We bring indie and AAA news and entertainment concepts to our followers. And we also have original content, like in the form of articles, in which case we are partnering up with you guys on. So this game is going to be featured in our Indie Game Roundup article series, our most popular article series on Game Infinite. You'll be able to find it at gameinfinite.net/news once it drops here in May. And we're really excited to do this interview. So I have a couple interview questions for this here. I would love to learn a little bit about Project Genesis premise and setting. Like, how did you guys come up with this type of game? Tell us a little bit about it. For those that haven't seen the trailer yet or haven't seen the game, can you tell us a little bit about what it is?
Yeah, so Project Genesis is a sci-fi PvP shooter. Its hook really is that we're mashing up two genres. One's with spaceships, battlecraft. It's basically a space combat theater, and the other genre is FPS play. So you can kind of think of it like Call of Duty in space, and it actually came from a failed experiment that we started, which was Project Genesis was originally a roguelike. We were hoping to try and make like a 3D roguelike game, very similar to like FTL, if you've ever played that. And we just didn't have a lot of roguelike experience on the team, but we did have a bunch of FPS experience. And so what ultimately ended up happening is kept trying to find the fun. It's one of the sort of mantras that you'll hear a lot in game development. And we just couldn't find it. And so I think what we ultimately decided to do was lean into our strengths, and that gets into FPS play. But we're also fans of space combat. So anything that you might see like Rogue Squadron or even flight simulators way back in the day, that was something that we really enjoyed playing. So we thought, well, what happens if we mash up these two experiences? So a little bit of chocolate and peanut butter, see if we can make a little magic. And ended up turning out a couple of experiences that were really fun. And I think the core sort of connective tissue is this breach and board mechanic that we kind of stumbled upon, which is how you get from space combat into like these giant capital ships, and you get to fight aboard decks and close quarter combat. And what's interesting is we're starting to see a little bit of echoes of this breach and board mechanic out in the industry. And I'm sort of curious if you or your audience has seen a title called Marauders. There's it's very they term themselves as I think like Tarkov in space. So they have a very similar mechanic. So there might be something in the zeitgeist out there. I don't know, maybe we'll be able to talk about that a bit more, but that was the inception of Project Genesis, and we've been working on it since about 2018 or so. And we just released our most recent milestone, which is Kepler, and it's up there on Steam right now. So if you or your community want to check it out, that's where you can go to find it.
Yeah, I wanted to touch on the formula for the game. I thought was really cool. It's something that I'm not familiar with the game that you mentioned. I haven't played it, but I will say I remember when I did play the demo, and I really enjoyed it. I played it for a couple hours. I was having a lot of fun, and I remember one thing kept going through my mind is how much it reminded me of a game from my childhood that I loved. That I was like, I haven't seen it done since that game, and I haven't really seen anyone else do this. Is the idea of having a game world that you're in where there's capital ships that you can fly around and do space combat, while other players or you can do the onboard shoot. And the game that kept me thinking of was the original Battlefront games for Star Wars.
Yes.
Yep.
And it was like, that's what they did. And that's what made it so cool, is that you can fly around and you can dogfight in space around capital ships, but then you could land on these capital ships and fight on board. And I haven't seen a game really do that since. They didn't even do that in the most recent, like the rebooted Battlefront games. And I've always thought that'd be really cool, the idea that if you could fly in space and also attack on a ship within the same game mode, within the same game build. And no one really does that. And I haven't seen anyone else do that. And when I was playing this, I was like, that kind of reminded me what it is that you can go back and forth between inside the stations or inside the ships and shoot first person, or you can fly around. And I loved that flexibility and that simultaneous like combat, because it allowed players, if they have a preference either way, they can it felt like there wasn't a lot of restriction of where you kind of focused. And I don't know, that's the game it reminded me of. So you guys are in great company. That's one of the, I think that's like an all-time great game. It's a phenomenal concept and it's not done very often. So I think you guys are in good company with that. That's the game it reminded me of. But no, I haven't really seen anyone else do that type of dualistic gameplay before.
Yeah, we noticed that with some of our community members coming from that space. They talked with great senses of nostalgia about. I think it was in 2009, right? It was at about the time frame that
Star Wars Battlefront 2.
Yeah.
That was the
Yeah.
2009 one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that and I hadn't played it, so and I've only seen YouTube videos of it, so I gotta get in and check it out. But they had said that it was very reminiscent of that experience, and that's really cool that we sort of also, I guess, stumbled upon that as well. Should look into that a bit more, just to see what I'm curious actually what you really liked about that experience. So you mentioned a little bit about the flexibility of it, and that's really interesting. The ability to switch between these two modes. Were there other elements from that game that that you think are good parallels for Project Genesis?
Let me answer the first part of your question of like what I really like about it is it brings a level of realism to the environment you're in. What I mean by that is you get games that are like I've played like what was it? I'm blanking right now. There's a lot of space dogfighting games where you're in a ship and you fly around space, and visually that's very cool. But if you can never land and get out, it starts to just feel like you're not in a real universe. And then the same thing is like there's a lot of first-person shooters that take place in space, but it's in space in name only, which means you're always inside a ship. So you're just looking at hallways that are just they're on a spaceship, but in reality, you're just in a hallway that supposedly is in space. So the idea, when you can actually in real time go back and forth, when you can get out of a spaceship and land on, it's that level of immersion. It's the transition from space to space station or space station to space that brings an element of realism to actually feeling like you're out in space doing things. When you're in a spaceship, you look at the capital ship, you look at the space station, you're like, I can go in there. Or if you're in the space station, look out a window, you can say, I can go out there. It was one of my biggest complaints about, for example, Mass Effect Andromeda had that. That was a game that had a lot of critical issues at launch. And one of my biggest complaints about it was they failed to deliver on something that was brought up in their development about like, we want you to be able to hop into the ship and take off and fly into space. And I'm like, okay, that's cool. I want that. And they didn't do that. So there was this dichotomy between the really beautiful spacescapes, a little cutscene, and then you can land and be on a planet. And I want to be able to actually feel like I can travel in space. So going back and forth between out in space and inside a spaceship is just not something that they do often enough. But I think it adds a long element of realism. So that was my favorite part about it, is when you need to have both simultaneously happening for it to feel like they're actually happening. I don't want to just see the spaceships far away outside a window. I want to be able to go there. And I think that's what players want. We're reaching this age in technology where when you see that thing far away, you want to be able to go there and be there now. It can't just be background anymore. And that's something that I thought was really impressive.
That's so true. You know, when you're watching a great sci-fi film with that sort of contrast between these epic space battles and then ground forces doing their thing, you're able to quick cut between those, as a movie maker, and so you can give audiences a view into what that contrast is like. So it's pretty awesome. And you're right, I haven't seen a lot of games do the space theater and then FPS theater. Star Citizen, I know they get a lot of criticism for schedule and budget, but man, when you get into that game, you definitely feel that epic kind of scope. That you really feel like you're in a galaxy. I think for us, we kind of go in maybe a little bit of a different direction, which is, we strip away all of the etherealness of sort of being out in space and going from space into planet side, or even from space aboard ships. We also try and remove a bunch of the complexity as well, so that it's all blood and guts, it's visceral, and we want that transition to be super quick from battlecraft combat right into FPS play, and vice versa. And so that's sort of where we're putting our magnifying glass in terms of gameplay mechanics. for us, it's this real fast-paced, and highly iterative play that hopefully it's getting its way to the screen. So it sounds like we might be getting close according to your perspective. So that's great. I mean, that's great feedback for us.
No, yeah, I loved it. I loved every moment of it. I had a question on what's going to be the scope of the project in terms of right now, obviously Steam, but like, do we have console aspirations in the future? What is your target like audience numbers? Like what is your plan for rollout? And as far as like, how do we make it to where when this thing goes live, that it's going to, because this is a multiplayer game. So this is about longevity and player base and that whole other conversation. What are your guys' plans to grow it in scope, make it a big thing? How does this game become the next Valheim or the next other indie hit that everyone's playing? What are your guys' plans to make this successful?
We've been really fortunate to be able to focus on the hard stuff first. And so we have a term that we use on the team quite frequently, which is eating our vegetables. And so in game development, it's kind of a trade-off between, well, you're going to get the fast, sizzly, glitzy stuff in first, which can really help promote your game. On the other side of it, there's really hard technical problems to try and solve. And so you mentioned multiplayer. We probably picked one of the hard, there's a couple of very difficult styles of games to create. We picked one of the hardest, which is this FPS multiplayer client server based game. And so we did that because there's a couple of difficult challenges. One's the technical side. So how do you get the ability to scale up servers dynamically to be able to support players all across the globe? And so it was one of the first things that we attempted to determine if we could accomplish sort of that technical feat. And we were pretty happy to report that we were able to do that. There's a gameplay component. You heard me mention finding the fun, and creating a multiplayer game, that's relatively generic. I mean, there's a lot of standard sort of mechanics that you can introduce, but to add the wrinkle of battlecraft combat into FPS play, it's another technical challenge. Can we create game modes that are fun? Do we have a really tight, what we would call game loop? And so that would be the next thing that we tried to sort out as we figured out how to marry these two genres together. And so I think just recently we sort of crossed that threshold to where we're starting to see this sort of really compelling play that keeps you coming back for more. So that's PvP multiplayer, and that's through Steam. That's sort of the way in which we were able to get builds out to our community. We have a couple of programs. We have a test pilot program where if you're a part of our community and you want to contribute to making the game better or beat the heck out of it, or have a direct line to us devs in terms of feedback, join that program and you get like the earliest and latest builds. So Steam is great for distributing builds out to the community and then more broadly to people who might be interested in this type of game. That's sort of phase one. Phase two, you'd right on the money, which is console. And so figuring out how to do cross-play between PC players, people on PS4, PS5, Xbox. So that'll be the next phase for us. And then there's sort of three tectonic chunks of game development, I think, in our future. One is going to be a PvE component. We're going to see how people find the PvP experience, but to be able to play co-op is something that we just kind of want to do for ourselves. We think other people will enjoy it. And then there's the single player experience, and that'll be much more about a story, narrative driven gameplay. And so we've got sort of these little stubs in that that sort of branch off in Project Genesis that let you see kind of what PvE might be like and kind of what the narrative experience might be like. A lot of it's progression based right now, so you gotta grind to open up and unlock these areas. But yeah, if you get into the game, you can kind of see the direction that we would be heading in those other two styles of play.
Awesome. And Noel, this question's for you. I wanted to ask. We have a lot of indie devs in our fan base, our followers, our community. A lot of fellow indie devs. We already have a dozen signed up in our new indie dev YouTube project. But a lot of the indie devs are smaller than you guys. You guys said you were about like a 12-ish person team. And you guys are working on one of the hardest genres in terms of like development with like multiplayer and all this other such. What would you say to you is your biggest challenge as an indie developer that you have to overcome and how you overcome it? Keeping in mind, a lot of these devs out there, they're solo. I know a lot of solo devs that are doing this in their free time on no money. And it's hard. You don't have a peer to fall back on when you have a rough day, or when you can't solve that coding problem, or you're having trouble figuring out something. How do you as an indie dev, how would you encourage them to overcome their problems that arise, to not feel alone? What are your biggest challenges, and how do you, as a slightly larger indie dev team, how do you overcome that?
Yeah, I think there's probably a couple different compartments for where challenges could arise. Obviously, if you're talking about the physical lack of support, maybe from just being a small team and not maybe having someone else to kind of shoulder some of that weight. Something that we do, even being a little bit bigger, that's not only helped with that aspect, but also provided a lot of perceived value for people in our community. Of course, this would be at a point where maybe your game is in some state of playable or testing ability. But we really lean on our community a ton for testing and to basically expand the amount of testing and people that and eyes we can get, and hands, I guess, on what's actually going on in the game. In exchange, we actually listen to their input. So it's not just like, hey, come test our game for us. We need bodies to help, try to find things that are broken. But at the same time, we then have created an entire infrastructure. James kind of referenced this when he talked about the test pilot program, which is actually one of 4 different roles in our larger affiliate partner program. We have people that are like ambassadors and, kind of exposure recruitment plus moderating in our Discord. We have ace pilots that are going to be coming in soon, which are kind of like a step above test pilots. These are kind of your hard charger, sweaty shooter ranked competitive ladder players that are going to help us with play balancing and weapon balancing. And then we have creators that help with streaming and whatnot to get the information about the game out there. But specifically with the test pilots, that's been really cool, where we've had some pretty awesome collaborations and partnerships with not only people in our community, but kind of at a larger scale. There's a lot of people that just don't have access to an opportunity to get experience in game dev, but they may want it, whether they're a player that just kind of wants to go behind the scenes and they just see how things work, or maybe they just kind of like breaking things and tinkering around, and the same players that probably are in your ranked lobbies and competitive shooters doing some weird glitch that hasn't been patched yet, but are able to find those things. And we not only have we been able to connect with communities, we've even been able to do some pretty cool things with like we have an ongoing collaboration with Wounded Warrior Project. So for the last year, not only with some of their Wounded Warriors that were interested in getting into the game dev industry in some capacity, whether maybe not even like in a coding or an actual design aspect, or maybe in a QA role or in some other fashion, and need a way to get their foot in the door. We were able to make this really cool collaboration where we kind of open the back end of the newest unreleased public builds or private builds that have not been released to the public, and give them an opportunity that probably would be very rare to find anywhere else, where they can get real life experience, see how the QA process goes, see how it is to write a bug, to identify a bug, see how the pipeline is for that sort of thing, get them some real world experience. In exchange, we've gotten a lot of really cool help from that. So I guess in the context of physical support, that would be cool. As far as like a shoulder to lean on, or colleagues that are in the same space facing the same maybe technical challenges, or maybe just the kind of grind of, even if you're doing something on the side while working a full-time job and you're not able to dedicate your entire workday to design. There's tons of fellow devs out there that either maybe were at the same level of or size of a team and facing the same challenges, maybe we're able to grow out of it, or maybe are still there and experiencing those same daily challenges that a lot of people that work in the indie dev space may face. And whether that's on Reddit, there's tons of good communities there, specifically for indie devs. Facebook, and not even just a thing to show off your work, but a thing to ask technical questions. All the time I see, as I'm browsing there, people asking technical questions that they're stuck on a specific problem, and they're looking for people that might know the answer without having to grind through and figure it out themselves. And there's a lot of resources with colleagues that you can lean on there. And in the side of getting people to help you with the actual task, and obviously testing is probably one of the biggest aspects, especially in early development, to try to, if you only have one person or two people, you only have so many eyes. So we've had quite a bit of success with being able to just say, hey, look, we're looking for help from you, and how can we make this worthwhile to you? And it's been a very open conversation and kind of an ongoing conversation that, as our needs or at any kind of point with requesting testing from the outside, that it's been an ongoing conversation where we continually ping and continually talk to the people that are helping us and dedicating their time and their energy and their experience from our community, whether with groups like Wounded Warrior Project, or there's tons of Discord communities out there that you literally can just type your type of game in and look for tags for that. And they're very receptive to the idea of like, here's something special for your community. We'd love to provide this for you. You'll get to work with the dev team. And of course, the whole caveat to this is that that value hinges on the fact that as a dev team, you then have a responsibility to actually value the input that you get. And we're pretty open and honest with just kind of a caveat of like, hey, we can't promise that every suggestion that's given, we can practically or realistically implement in the exact way that you want it. But we've leaned into it enough from our community that, since they're the ones spending time with it and what they find enjoyable is important to us, so we've implemented as many changes as we can while still making sure that we're sticking with our original design and kind of long-term goals for the project. And the perceived value from those community members and the testers dedicating all this time has been really cool. And whether it's a acknowledgement in game, we give them badges and recognition, and for significant contributions. Like this last Kepler milestone, we kind of upped the ante for the value that we try to give back, and actually had a bunch of their names in the game, so you can actually see. And that's kind of cool as a player. You boot up a game and your name's in it somewhere. So yeah, people are very much willing, much more than you would think, to be able to get on board and find a way to have some ownership themselves and some value themselves in that while contributing, as long as you demonstrate that you value what they're providing for you. And in a lot of ways, it just has come down to like, hey, what do you want? Like, what would you think is cool in exchange for you helping us out and being so willing to be a part of our testing process?
I really appreciate that in-depth. I know I'm sure some of our indie dev friends out there will take something from that. I know it's rough going it out alone, and indie devs, they like to stick together. It's good to stick together. There's power in numbers there. So I appreciate that insight. I have two more questions. This one's for you, James. You mentioned that you were in the AAA space for a while and you converted into indie because you liked indie better. What do you say is the biggest advantage about the indie space? So that we just talked about the challenges, like how do you overcome challenges, but what did you like about the indie space that made you leave the AAA resume behind? And like, what attracted you? What makes it special? Why do you like it?
That's a great question. There is an awesome book that I would recommend that like anybody who is potentially thinking about taking on like investment or working with a publisher, even on the indie side, indie's sort of it can mean, well, it's a small team. But indie typically, in its more kind of formal definition, would be something like not working with either a publisher. You can take investment, but the book that I would recommend that everybody check out is called Founder's Dilemma. And in it, he gets right to the, I kind of didn't know that this is what was going on with me at the time, to contrast what you get from being in an indie space versus being in AAA. But the book does an outstanding job of breaking it down. So here's the biggest difference between them. The advantage of going indie is kind of on two fronts. One, in my case, it's about control to a certain degree, the ability to just create the game that you and your team want to create without any real outside influence. It's way cooler from my perspective to have direct content, like Noel was saying, contact with your community, getting feedback from them and helping them give you a kind of navigation system to figure out what should be put into your game. There are going to be other creative folks who, maybe want less input even from a community, to just create the art as they see it, maybe dial down the commercial side of things. So that's the one thing I think that indie provides that maybe AAA doesn't as much, unless you're in key positions in AAA, and you can still kind of have a pretty significant amount of freedom, but to express your vision. But that's the one side. So that's what you get from indie. There are sort of lottery ticket moments where they're breakout games that are sort of like the most recent one. I think it's, what is it? Among Us is sort of the big one, that's the big indie game that sort of popped out of nowhere. But they'd been working on that title for a number of years before they had gotten popular. But I just bring that to everybody because it's an example of sort of this unicorn event. A lot of indies struggle to sort of do this breakthrough process. And that's what you get on the publishing side. You sort of get these, on the AAA side, these sort of, it's like a binary star system, a gravity well, figure out whatever you want to call it, but it's effectively money. So you oftentimes will have access to large quantities of money. You're not really ever worried too much about whether or not you're going to be able to put food on the table. It's definitely on the indie side a bigger concern, but usually it's access to capital and structure and stability. And then the other thing that AAA can get you is oftentimes AAA, especially nowadays, they have the momentum of previous franchise success, let's say. And so, and Noel is probably well aware of this, sort of on the community and marketing side, which is there's a lot of momentum. You have the big guys on speed dial. These are the IGNs, or you get prime real estate at E3, and so your ability to get exposure is a lot easier typically in the AAA side of things, and money for marketing there as well.
I like what you said about the ease of just having that kind of direct control of making the game and having that creative freedom. That really stuck out to me because I know, I think a lot of gamers are starting to realize the inflexibility of AAA. We're seeing some of the biggest games that people would have said, just a couple years ago were too big to fail, but they're so big, they're almost too big to succeed because they don't know how to pivot. They don't know how to be creatively different. Sometimes like some of these biggest ones, without naming names, like some of these biggest publishers that are churning out identical games. And I think gamers are starting to be clued into that. If I want a different experience, I need to find someone that's going to be able to deliver me an unusual or different experience. And I can't get that from AAA anymore. And not to say that AAA doesn't have its purpose. I'm not saying that at all, but I think gamers are becoming more attuned to in the indie space, because when they're tired of playing the 18th version of a game, they want something new. And AAA right now is struggling sometimes to deliver new experiences. And we're seeing creatives in the indie space making games where we're seeing like businessmen in the AAA space making games, or at least making the decisions that the creatives have to follow. And I think that's where indie's starting to win a little bit, is that creativity is still in charge. Whereas in the AAA, they're struggling to keep creativity in charge. And I think a lot of gamers are starting to see that. My last question is for either of you. You both can answer, whoever you think. We talked a little bit about the hook of the game. So just bringing it back to this game specifically, Project Genesis. The hook is the gameplay hook about the duality of both space play and FPS play. That's really cool on the multiplayer side. And I know you mentioned briefly, like down the road, you'd love to bring like a single player campaign. It sounded like. I would love to just, I'm sure our viewers would love to know a little bit just about the game's lore and world. Like what is, because there's a lot of FPS games, there's a lot of space games. I think this game's unique with that gameplay mechanic. But what could you tell us about the world or the story or anything about this universe? Because gamers love universes. They love falling in love with anything, planets, people, characters, factions. Like, what is it about this game's universe that you could tell us that we can share with our followers? Tell us a little bit more about the lore in the universe.
Yeah, maybe I'll start high concept and then go sort of gritty when we're talking about like core narrative. So high concept, really, it's a future that exists with 3 exponential technologies, sort of creating a fusion reaction of exploration. And so the first one is genetics. We run the script on what it would be like for all of the cool stuff that you're seeing in the headlines now with genetic manipulation, cloning, all that stuff. So that's one track. Another track is the advent of AI and the ever advancing and evolving machine learning and general learning tech that's coming out. You've seen it with Tesla or gosh, I can't believe it's escaping me right now, but it's the one with the dog, Boston Dynamics. Yeah. One evaporated. So, but you're seeing like massive increases in what AI is capable of. And then the final tech is space travel. But our particular flavor on this is taking a lot of the work from, if you're a fan of Joe Rogan and have seen Graham Hancock on his interviews, there's some really great stuff that's coming out of that exploration with new discoveries in sort of these ancient technologies that appear to give some hints that there was an ancient civilization before sort of standard archaeological digs have sort of reported what we call like current doctrine. So about 11,000 years ago, there's some suggestion that was a giant either asteroid impact or maybe it's solar flares or maybe some combination of the two that wiped out a global civilization that existed before. So our story starts effectively when some explorers enter into the main pyramid in Egypt and receive a transmission that they then have to decode. They don't know where it comes from and they don't know what it says, but they eventually crack the code, and that opens up the ability for them and us across the planet to engage in faster than light travel. So we discover a warp drive, warp tech, and that's the start of Project Genesis. The adventures begin from there.
I love the narrative archetype of the ancient advanced civilization, the Atlantists, the Protheans. Like, it's present in some of my favorite video game series. I love Assassin's Creed. I love Mass Effect.
Yes.
I love sci-fi stories that rely on a long time ago there was this really advanced civilization that had superpowered technology and that somehow plays into the modern day story, and that's what pushes things. I love that. I love that archetype.
Awesome.
It's never used enough, and it's really cool, and it always sucks me in as a gamer. So I'm sure that's going to resonate with the players.
Right on. I hope so.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that. So those are all my questions. I want to thank you guys for taking time to chat with us. We're definitely going to help share out the trailer for those that haven't seen it yet. And we're going to put down in the comments below, we're going to put in the description, I'm sorry, we're going to put the Steam link so you guys can go check it out on Steam, and definitely wish list that and play that demo. It's awesome. Yeah, this has been a great time. Thanks for joining us over here on the Game Infinity.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks, Jesse.